Our next guest is Professor Ramesh Thakur. He is the Emeritus Professor in the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University, the ANU University, very good university in actual fact, based in Canberra, a Senior Research Fellow at the Toda Peace Institute and a Fellow of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. He's got an awful lot more of his curricula vitae. I'll introduce you to that in just a moment, but let's get him on the show now. Professor Ramesh Thakur joins us from Australia. Ramesh, it is absolute pleasure to hear you again. We saw you play cricket a long time together.
Back in the day in Otago, yes indeed. Morning, Michael.
I'm trying to remember. Did you bowl medium pace or spin?
Medium pace.
Medium pace, I thought so. You let the side down, didn't you? Because you are of Indian descent. So, I mean, we all know that Indians are spin bowlers. But yeah, I suppose you also have...
Who do you rank as the world's best fast bowler at the moment?
Well, you see, probably Bumrah. Yeah, you got there. Yeah, exactly. Jasper Bumrah. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, yeah. Anyway, go on.
No, and I remember it was mostly a team composed of academics from Otago University, but I don't know if you remember...
University Cricket Club.
Yep, but there was also a young boy who played for us once. I don't know if you remember. He was only 12 or 13, and his name was Chris Cairns. Do you remember that?
No, I don't. Maybe he was in one of the other teams rather than mine.
No, he played with us once. He came and played for us once. I think he wasn't playing that, but his team wasn't playing. And I tell you what, God,
I remember Chris. I remember Chris later, but I don't remember him playing with us.
Now, at that time, though, you were at Otago University as a lecturer, I think, in the politics department of Otago University. Is that right?
Correct.
And then you left New Zealand. And you have become so distinguished, I think you've got about 5 paragraphs of achievements, including being one of the principal authors of the Responsibility to Protect and the principal of writer of Secretary-General United Nations, Secretary-General Kofi Annan's second reform report. You're a distinguished fellow of the Centre for International Governance Innovation, the foundation director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo, Ontario, and you're co-convener of the Asia-Pacific Leadership Network for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. You actually did quite well for yourself, Ramesh.
I've had a satisfying, privileged work life, yes.
And then you ended up, at ANU, did you? Was that your last academic appointment?
Actually, when I left Otago, I came to the ANU to head up the Peace Research Centre, then left to join the United Nations. Then back to Canada, and now after that I returned to the ANU to set up a new Centre for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, whose funding fell victim, unfortunately, to the Indonesian civil war between the Labour Party when in government, with the changes of prime ministers. Things that we thought we had been promised did not come through. But I stayed with that and retired 6 years ago.
Right.
And now emeritus.
Now, but interestingly, and this is how I read of you, I think I read it in the Australian, or it might have been something similar. We went through the COVID crisis, and despite having a background in political affairs and disarmament and diplomacy, you came away with a different view on what was happening and how the West was in actual fact organising itself. And you wrote an article called "Have the West's Elites Declared War on the People?" ? Where did you get those thoughts originally from?
Well, I actually wrote Kofi Annan's second reform report, as you mentioned in the introduction, going back to 2002. And as you also mentioned, I was one of the main authors of the Responsibility to Protect. Between the two, we dealt with a lot of things in relation to UN reforms and also in relation to the politics of different views, interests and perspectives between what's now called the Global North and the Global South. And it's clear that, to paraphrase the late Queen, it's not just recollections may vary, but interpretations of sovereignty vary, especially in terms of what it means in practice. And also, in fact, for some time now, well before COVID, I've been worried about the belief amongst the international elite that their technocratic expertise somehow gives them a legitimacy that is over and beyond the democratic legitimacy of elected governments. And we see this even as we talk yesterday with the request from the International Criminal Court prosecutor for arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar. In effect, in the public mind, denoting a moral equivalency between the elected leader of a democratic government responding to a mini Holocaust on October 7th, and by any account, any objective definition, a terrorist leader. And if that arrest warrant were to be issued, just to complete this train of thought, countries that have signed up to the ICC, including New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom, would be required to arrest the Prime Minister of Israel should he step onto our soil. Now, every country has a mix of interests and values. There is no country that is free of the taint of double standards in foreign policy, from minor to more serious extents.
Yeah.
But it is the country's sovereign right to determine choice between interests, choice between values, and choice between interests and values. Effectively, however, we have transferred that hitherto sovereign right to an international judicial body that is not embedded in a wider democratic context and set of structures internationally. And that is an example of what I was saying, that technocratic legitimacy is overriding democratic legitimacy. Now, while in general there are many things that I have supported and still do, I think we need to acknowledge that there are limits and that it should not be a stealthy advance to unelected and unaccountable world government, that we need to re-establish the sovereignty of the people rather than state sovereignty, which is being, as the title of my book says, how COVID was used to enable the expansion and abuse of state power. That has come at the expense of people's power and people's sovereignty. So that has been a long-standing concern that came to a head during COVID years when we abandoned national pandemic preparedness plans. I'm not sure that New Zealand had one, I don't know. But certainly we had it in Australia, UK, Canada, and the US. And surprisingly, the WHO, the World Health Organization, actually published a report in September 2019. So that's just a few months, 3 or 4 months before the pandemic is declared, which summarized a century's worth of science, experience, data, and policy, and rejected a lot of the things that we then imposed during lockdowns. And that was the elites. The laptop class, the Zoom class, whatever you want to call them, they did very well, but they had no skin in the game. I'm not aware of any Western country's bureaucracy that took a salary hit, or the politicians. And yet the economic costs were imposed on the poor and the middle classes, the working classes. So that divide you see across the board, even with regard to climate change, where it's another example of a luxury belief. We want to virtue signal and make sure that the costs are borne, if not alone, then at least disproportionately by the poor and the working classes and the poor countries as well. So it is a long-standing concern that has come to a head when I see across the board that they now clearly believe that they have the right to tell everyone else, that means the majority of the quote-unquote deplorables, what to think, how to live, where to live, etc.
Go back to COVID. So you had these views prior to the response of international countries to the COVID pandemic, that the technological elites were circumventing democratic processes in Western nations in particular?
Mm-hmm.
What particular causes were you thinking of? Were you thinking in terms of...
Well, at that time, Well, at that time, the dominant cause was clearly the whole climate change issue,
Yeah, yeah.
where you can draw distinctions between the science, the policy, and the politics, and apply that, the politics part in particular, at the global level. And clearly, the impact is different, and the responsibility is different between developing countries and the industrialized countries. And that shows up most starkly when we say, well, India is the number 2 emitter, big emitter in the world, and the Indian government response, and then the popular response is, well, that's only in net aggregate. If you look at per capita, India is way down the list, and the responsibility historically is that of the Western countries who, through the Industrial Revolution, have contributed the biggest in terms of pollution. That still doesn't solve the problem, and the politics are horrific, and the costs are becoming evident in the Western countries.